Welcome to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. Today I am joined by Patrick Donnelly. Patrick and I will first introduce through Mark Meyer from the Face It Foundation. Mark introduced me to quite a few people actually, and Patrick's one of those. Patrick lives in Minnesota, and I'll let him introduce himself in a second. So welcome, Patrick.
Nice to be here. Thank you, Philip.
So what I'll do, Patrick, is ask you to just start where does your mental health journey begin? When did you first start to notice that things perhaps weren't as you would want them to be?
I would say the key moment for me was in terms of realizing what was going on came after I became a father for the first time. My older daughter is almost 27 now, so she was born in February of 98, and that would have been almost 30 years old at the time. And the anxiety really kicked in at that point, feeling kind of helpless. I mean, they say when you have children, you get to watch your heart bounce around in the world unprotected. And that's definitely how I felt. But I also had this sense of there's expectations of me that people have or society has or whatever that I don't even know what they are. And yet I'm feeling like I'm not living up to them. More judging myself than anything else. But I, told myself that that was society judging me. And it wrought havoc on my mental health at that time, to the point where I'd say by about a year and a half into that journey, my wife, who had known me for a decade at that point, said, something's not right. You need to talk to somebody if you think that, if you agree with me. And I did agree. It was kind of her to point that out. So yeah, that's kind of how it started. So I started therapy then. I eventually got onto some antidepressants, and that kicked off a 20-some year journey of kind of looking back at my life and seeing different ways, different points, even in my childhood, where that kind of the mental health, both the anxiety and depression really rose up, and then fighting it in my current life, finding ways to treat it in a healthy manner.
So back when, year and a half, 2 years into having your first child, how were things manifesting? Were there physiological manifestations? Did you think it was just normal having a new baby?
Of course I thought it was normal. Don't we all? I was tired all the time. And that's typical of new parenthood, I think. But I look at photos of myself from back then even, and I wish I was thinner, like as thin as I was then. But I have just such a low affect on my face. It's just, I look like, I look like I was just brought out of a coma or something. And my wife noticed it. She would say, I would come home from work and I'd have this big joyous reunion with my daughter, and we'd play and laugh and have fun. And then I'd set her down, and then it would be like a veil went over my face. And I was just back to, and I had no energy for anything but being a father at the time. So that, and I started getting more anxious. I had more of I don't want to say a temper, like physical temper, but I would be snappier, quicker to snap, and just, I was not happy. And you could see it just by looking at me, to the point where even, like my mom noticed it, and some friends noticed it and said, something going on? What's happening? So yeah, there were definitely physical manifestations of it.
So when you sought therapy then, after talking to your wife and realizing that you needed some help, was it at that point that you started to, retrospectively look at possible causes or instances in your life that may have triggered some of these feelings?
Yeah, it started then, but it was a long journey for me to really get there. I think I focused at first on just how do I feel right now, and how do I deal with the emotions and any physical issues that I've got currently. And once I sort of balanced that out, I think my approach was, okay, let's just work on being happy now, or work on being comfortable with life now. And I didn't really, it took me a while before I started going a little bit deeper into it, into what what the reasons were that it was manifesting like this. In some ways, I felt like the reason or the background of it wasn't all that important, because whatever it was, it brought me to where I was at that point. So I was more concerned with survival, I guess. It took me probably 15 years or so before I started unpacking some things and realizing, maybe drawing some ties to why things have played out the way that they did for me. And I really started looking back then finally at my childhood. And I also was learning more about it at the time too, and how depression and anxiety worked. And so, yeah, I started thinking more about my childhood, and not to get too deep into it, but when I was 3, my father was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and it was in the early 70s. This was essentially a death sentence, they thought. I mean, when he first was hospitalized for it, he was in the hospital for like 6 weeks, and they'd given him, I found out later that, they gave him last rites 3 or 4 times. Like, they thought he wasn't coming home. And he did, and he's still with us today, remarkably. Still fighting. It's been, his life has been a long struggle with the symptoms of MS. But I first I thought about it, and I thought, well, I never really knew any different. Like I said, I was only 3, so I didn't really feel like there was an impact on my life, because I don't remember what life was like before that. But as I got into it and thought more about it, I internalized a lot of. I think that anxiety came from internalizing some of those feelings and things that I learned by having this happen to my father. And part of it is that he's such a great guy, and to have something so horrible happen to him kind of set me on this course of, I don't know, life is futile in a lot of ways. If it can happen to him, what it can happen to anybody. So you should always be looking out for the next horrible thing around the corner. And I realized, years later, that I've kind of spent my life in that mode, and that has an effect on you. One of the ways that it played out, I think, was in risk aversion. And I often seem to take the path of least resistance, because putting myself out there could lead to, more danger, more harm to me, whatever it might be. So I did a lot, and risk aversion in a lot of ways is good. That's how we survive as a society. But it ended up, the way it looked with me is I ended up not really having a lot of self-confidence, and never really betting on myself. I never took the kind of big swing at life that produces greatness. So the best example I have for that is even in high school, I was a writer. I started writing for my hometown daily newspaper when I was 16. And that was it. I was hooked. I was going to be a sports writer, and I was so excited about that. And I went to college and got all my prerequisites in and aced them all. And so I was right on the edge of joining or getting into journalism school. And I chickened out. I panicked. I changed my major to English and became I wanted to be a high school teacher and a coach instead. And I rationalized it by telling myself, well, a lot of my most important people in my life were teachers and coaches along the way, and I could play that role for other kids. That would be a very meaningful way to spend my life. What really was behind it was that I was afraid I would dive into this and commit to this journalism world and not get the job that I wanted. I've got to remember this was pre-internet days, or very early internet days. So no one had blogs and there was no social media. There really was no way to get your writing published and out there unless you were with part of what we call the legacy media here, newspapers, magazines, and the like. And there were only so many of those. So I was convinced that I would have to pay my dues by going to a small town and writing for a small town, weekly newspaper, even smaller than the town that I grew up in, which was like 13,000. But I was convinced I was going to get stuck at some small town dead end job and never find my way back to the big city and covering the exciting things that I wanted to cover and write about. So I instead of giving it 3 or 4 years and seeing how it would go and trusting that my talent would carry me to where I wanted to get to, I just backed down and said, I give. I'm not going to try it. And so I taught high school for 3 years and I hated it. I was miserable. It was awful. It was a terrible fit for me personally. I'm not a morning person. And high school teachers, around in the US generally are at school by 6:30 in the morning. And that's just not me. And then you're on basically all day. You might have a prep period, but otherwise you're on duty and you're on leading a classroom. And I don't like being the center of attention that much. I can pick and choose center of attention spots, and that's great, but all day, every day, no, thank you. So it was a bad fit. So I ended up, for the first time in my life, this would have been about a year and a half before my daughter was born. For the first time in my life, I bet on myself and I just quit. I quit teaching. I didn't have anything else lined up, but I was not a happy person at that moment. So I decided to try to do what I could do to get back into the writing world, the journalism world. And within a couple months, I had a job it was a corporate communications job, and it wasn't writing about baseball or basketball or anything, but it was using my skills, my knowledge of English and my writing abilities. Instead of trying to teach them to someone else, it was me actually using them. And boy, did that feel rewarding. So that, I think, helped me get through that point in my adulthood. And I was doing pretty well until then again became a parent and then kind of went south again. The anxiety really took over. But at least by then I had seen what can happen if I bet on myself, if I believed that it would work out, that my skills would take over. And that was not drilled into me when I was younger. That was not a message that came through loud and clear. And I still honestly have a hard time doing that. It's not my first instinct.
That sense of overwhelming sense of futility that you talked about that would probably subconsciously impacted your decision making. So moving forward to the therapy then. So I think a lot of people listening, if they haven't had experience of therapy, don't really know what it means, and it kind of sounds a bit mysterious. Are you able to kind of just tell us from your experience and what you're prepared to say, what happens there, and how do you benefit it? Why should you do it, I guess?
Well, the first thing I'll say is it's a process, and you might not click with the first therapist that you try or the first 10 therapists that you try. So don't expect, a veil to be lifted immediately when the first time you do it, if you're new to therapy. You got to give it a chance. And you may have to, what do they say? You may have to kiss a few frogs before you meet a prince. Well, yeah, you may have a few experiences that just you don't click with that person. I think I went to I went to therapy for about 11 years and that was with 6 at least different therapists before I finally met the woman I'm working with now. And I've been with her for 13 years now, I think. And so what happens, you sit down, you kind of do a check-in, what's going on in your world today and what's been going on the last couple of weeks since we met last. And then it can spiral off into anything that comes out of that conversation, or you can have big picture things that you're working on together. One of the things that I've worked a lot on with my current therapist is it's funny, the risk aversion thing. It's being comfortable with discomfort, being comfortable in uncomfortable situations, and tolerating discomfort. So instead of immediately quitting something, like I can't tell you how many times I've picked up an acoustic guitar and even took lessons and done some online stuff, but my personality in a lot of ways is wired so that if I don't do something perfectly the first time, I quit. I don't want to do it anymore. So yeah, it's tolerating not being perfect in my mind. And we work a lot on that. And I've come a long way with that. Most recent example being, I don't want to dive too deep into politics, but you may have heard that there was an election here in the U.S. a few weeks ago, and the candidate that I favored did not win the presidency here. And we've, a lot of us on the left, if you will, view this as kind of an existential crisis. And 8 years ago, when that person won for the first time, I spiraled for a little while, and actually that's what led me to the Face It Foundation. I had heard about it, and after 2 or 3 weeks of seeing what my life had become, or what my thought process and my feelings were after that election, I thought, you know what, let me check out this Face It thing and see if I can get some support here. And this time around, I'm not happy with the result, but even by the next day, actually that night, when I saw where this was going, instead of leaving the TV on and wallowing in it and getting angrier and angrier, I turned off the TV. I put music on. I listened to music, and I did some writing, and I texted both my daughters. They're 26 and 20 now, almost 27 and 21. And I just said, I know you guys are probably scared about the future of our country and how this might affect you. And I said, we're here for you. Your mom and I are here for you. And that one way that I'm approaching this, and I'm going to approach the next 4 years, is to focus on the things that I can control and not worry too much about the things that are out of my control. Now, you can control more than maybe you think, just by putting in the work and helping people who are vulnerable and who have been made more vulnerable through this election. So it's not like I'm pulling back and saying, I'm just going to drop out. It's pulling back and saying, I have a healthier approach to this now. Then I'm not letting it phase me. So that is the product of 11 years of working with my therapist, Anna, to get to this point.
So we talked We talked a bit, actually, before we started recording about a post. It started off as a Facebook post, I think, and then you wrote a piece and it became, quite a viral sensation. And perhaps you could tell us a bit more about that.
Sure. That happened right after I joined Face It. So this would have been January of 2017. And I had a friend named Kristen who I had never really talked mental health with her at all. We'd gotten to know each other just basically through online stuff, and then met in real life. My wife and I met her and her husband, great people. And one day she posted on, I think it was Instagram, just a photo of her smiling face. And she said, "This is the face of depression." And I was like, whoa, that was... And she, went on to talk about her mental health journey and helped me realize that you can't always judge what's going on with somebody based on just the superficial part of their lives that you get to see in social media or even in your, brief face-to-face encounters. So I thought that was so brave of her to do that. I could never do that. And then I thought, again, why couldn't I do that? And then I thought maybe I could do that. So I sat down one night in that January of 2017, and in 20 minutes, I probably banged out 1,000 words on what my whole mental health journey was like. And I started off by saying, I had all these great things going on in my life, and yet I would, like, when I was a little kid, I had a lot of friends and I had a loving family, and we weren't rich, but we certainly also weren't living scraping pennies together. I had a comfortable childhood, and yet I was always a little bit off. I was a little bit anxious. I was a little bit scared. And then that went into my adulthood when I got a great wife and 2 great kids, and yet still I couldn't. The point that I got around to was saying I could count my blessings, but I couldn't appreciate them. And so I just spilled it all out on the page like that. And then I talked about what have I done to help counteract this. And part of it is exercise and diet related. Part of it is getting sleep. Part of it is talk therapy. Part of it is meds. And I mentioned the Face It Foundation, which I had just started. I'd probably been to like 3 or 4 meetings. I said that helped. I was like, if this strikes a chord with you, if it sounds familiar to you, I encourage you to do some of the things that I did to try and, make improvements in your life. And I read through it once for typos. I didn't really sit and think about it too much. I just read through it, made sure I didn't have any typos or anything, and then I put it on my Facebook page and hit publish. And within an hour, the post had 300, 400 either, likes or comments, or I had direct messages from people, from friends of mine, obviously, because that's who your Facebook connections are, saying either I had no idea, I didn't know that was going on with you, or a lot more of them were men saying to me, "Wow, that sounds so much like my life." It felt like I was reading my story. And when that happened, I got that reaction. All that support came piling in. It felt great, obviously, and it helped me, I think, take another step along the way in my journey. And it also told me I think this thing needs a little broader audience. So how can I get this out there beyond my own circle of friends? And the local daily newspaper here in Minneapolis had a project, I guess, going on at the time where they were inviting people from the community to just submit essays about different topics that are important to them. And Mental Health Month was coming up. I think May here in the U.S. is Mental Health Month. And so I wrote into the editor and said, hey, I had this Facebook post. If I kind of clean it up and generalize it a little instead of making it just about my specific life, would you run it? And they said, sure, they liked it. So I submitted it, and it ran, it published on like a Thursday, I think it was, like a Thursday morning paper in late April, right before Mental Health Awareness Month. But it went online like Wednesday afternoon, earlier that Wednesday. And I had mentioned Face It in there once, just one mention of it. And I think when they coded the article onto the website, they did a link to the Face It account, or the Face It website. So you could just click the link. And I got a call from Mark Meyer and Bill Deckus, who's his co-founder of Face It, the two head guys. And they said, what did you do? Because their phones were ringing off the hook, and the inbox was filled with inquiries from men or from women inquiring about it so that they could talk to the men in their life who they thought it would benefit. And yeah, it really set off a firestorm of interest in, I mean, I hope this carried over to other organizations, but I can tell you what it's done for Face It. We had, let's see, I think the group that I joined in December of 2016 was our fourth support group. So our support groups are about 10 guys, maybe, and you meet every other week for 2 hours. So my group was every other Thursday for 2 hours, 10 guys. We'd get together and chat and talk about our issues and help each other out and just be support, just pure support. That's it. So like I said, I think I was our fourth group, and Face It had been around for 7 years at that point, I think. By the end of the year, by the end of that calendar year, we were up to 13 groups of guys, coming in every 2 weeks in little groups of 10. So we tripled the number of men we were helping. And today, I think we're up to 23 groups now, plus a few more outreach things. We have a retreat center now that we just opened, and Face It is really thriving. It's doing great, and the men that we've helped along the way are doing great, and they're going out, and it's a ripple effect. When you help someone, and then they'll help someone, and they'll help someone, and the circle of influence gets wider and wider. So even today, I'll still have guys I'll meet at, like, we'll get together as a large group for breakfast. We're like maybe 50 of us who are in Face It groups. We'll get together for breakfast once a month. I'll still have guys coming up to me in the breakfast and say, you're the reason that I'm here. And I don't even know them. They're complete strangers. But, they said that article you wrote, if you hadn't written that, I never would know anything about this. I shudder to think where I might be today. I've had wives pull me aside at events and say, you're the reason my husband's still alive. You're the reason my children still have a father. And that's impactful. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm the only reason or that's why, but it showed me the importance of putting the message out, also of being vulnerable. Because I mean, I opened myself up to anything, because I put my name on there and linked to what was my Twitter account at the time, and people knew me. I was a vulnerable situation.
I think that's one of the big problems, isn't it? That men don't want to admit that they're vulnerable or to open up and talk about anything that might not deemed to be masculine or just out of their comfort zone. Why do you think that is? Why do you think male mental health awareness is growing, but rates of depression and suicide are also going up? So there's not, you would assume, the other way around, but there's still a disconnect. Why do you think that is? Well,
I think it's hardwired into our brains, unfortunately, those of us of a certain age, that the messages that we grew up with, one of the benefits or one of the happy things that has come out of this awareness is there have been a lot of stand-up comedians here in the US at least have done some very fun specials about their own depression and growing up with it and how they've conquered it. One of them was a guy named Gary Gulman. He did a special about 5 years ago called the Big Depression or the Great Depression. And what he said that really resonated with me was, he's like, growing up as a sensitive boy in the 70s was really hard because there were basically two male role models or two male types at the time. He said, you're either Clint Eastwood or Richard Simmons. I'm like, you're right. That's it. That was it. You had to be a tough guy and you couldn't show any kind of emotion or vulnerability or sensitivity for fear of getting bullied, getting, razzed, whatever it was. But society told you, no, you have to be tough and stern, and you swallow your problems instead of working on them. And that stigma is really hard to overcome. I do think we are bit by bit breaking that down. Professional athletes have helped a lot. And there have been, I'd say in the last 10 years, there's been a huge surge of these big, tough athletes being willing to talk about their own fears and their own anxieties and their own mental health issues. I think social media in a lot of ways has helped that because you can find a community easier that way. But it's also harmed it because we're putting out, you also have access to the most toxic messages around there. So it's a balance. And that might be one of the reasons why, even though awareness is growing, so are, like you said, suicide and other mental issues are growing. A big part of it too, I think, is the pandemic. We are still reckoning with what 2020 meant to our society and what it did to the world. I don't think even in our lifetimes we're ever going to have a full review of what it really did to us. And I think a big part of it is it increased our isolation, or it shined a light on our isolation. And people who handled it better used that light to connect and make connections with others. But I think a lot of people also retreated and went inward, and unfortunately, many have succumbed to their disease. And it's something that we have to continue to face as a society and continue to work on.
So people listening to this, or maybe people listening to this who are concerned about people in their lives, maybe the men in their lives or women, what advice, would you give if you can see that somebody's suffering, or perhaps has got that kind of blank veil that you were talking about, or even someone, feeling that themselves? What can they kind of do in the first instance?
Well, one thing that we talk about at Face It is always make the next right decision. So it could be as simple as if it's you that, you're the one experiencing the issues. It could be as simple as go take a shower, change the environment that you're in. So just immediate things that you can change to deal with what's happening on a small picture scale. Big picture scale, talk to somebody. There are more resources out there than you know. And if you are completely stuck, call me, text me, or email me. Call Face It. Send them an email. And there are probably other organizations where you live that are similar to that or can help. But reach out. The help might not always find you. You might have to seek it out. In terms of people who have someone in their life who you might need this kind of help, what can you do to support them? Talk to them. Be clear to them that you are there for them. You are non-judgmental support for them. You're there in any shape or form that you might be needed. But just talk to them. And if you have had issues yourself, you could model good behavior for them. You can talk about, if you've gone to therapy, you can talk about your own journey and how it's helped you. Or just let them know that, it's okay. It's okay to not be okay, for one thing. In some ways in this world, if you're tooling along with no problems at all, I wonder what's wrong with you. We all have issues that we have to be dealing with, and we just don't all handle them as well as others. So, talk to somebody, or if you see someone in your life who's hurting, talk to them and just let them know in a non-judgmental way that, you're there for them and are available to help them out.
And I guess you are proof positive that speaking up actually can have a very positive effect. Your Facebook post, which then escalated and meant that, who knows how many people then sought help.
Yeah, one moment of vulnerability for me has led to a number of guys who I know now personally, seeking help, getting help, living happier lives, and kids who still have their dads, and not just alive, but their dads are more active and positive roles, and they're playing positive roles in their lives. Women who have husbands, parents who still have sons, that kind of thing. And that was through a moment of vulnerability for me, and a moment of bravery, I guess you could say, although it didn't feel brave at the time. I think a lot about superheroes. I was telling my quote unquote origin story at one of our Face It breakfasts once, and I said I use the term origin story intentionally because everyone in this room, we're all superheroes in a way, and not the kind of superhero like Superman was, because nothing could hurt him, right? He could get shot by a bullet and it would bounce right off him. So how brave are you really if you know you can't be hurt? It's people who go into the battle knowing that you could be hurt and you still do it anyway, because it's the right thing to do, and it's going to help yourself and help others. That's real bravery. And all the guys that have taken that step to be vulnerable to each other and to the people in their lives have shown that kind of bravery, and it's really paid off for them.
Well, I think, on everything you've just said, then why, if people can put aside their fear and put aside their fear of appearing vulnerable, then why wouldn't you? This is a very good step forward, and look at the positive effects that it can have. Yeah,
I would say, I know I'm a writer. Okay, I'm a professional writer, so maybe I did have some sort of skills, but it wasn't people weren't responding to my literary flourishes in the essay. They were responding to the emotion, to just the honesty that I put out there, and anybody can do that.
Well, I think we need more people like you, Patrick. So thank you. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for being very honest and open with us.
Thanks. We need more people like you as well, sir. Thank you for doing this and for putting this problem into the spotlight. And you're helping people too. I can guarantee you that.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for listening to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. If you or someone you know is struggling with depression, the Face It organisation that Patrick talks about can be found at faceitfoundation.org. If you want to read Patrick's original Facebook post, the link is in the episode description, along with a link to the Gary Gulman special that Patrick also references. If you want to contact him, his Instagram account is pdonnelly612 and his Blue Sky account is at donnelly612.bsky.social. And these links will also be in the description. If you have a story to tell and you think your experience would help others, then please do get in contact with me, either via the website, mid-lifemen.com, or email me at midlifemen01@gmail.com. Finally, if you enjoyed the episode, please share it with people you know and with your networks.